Welcome to the Squint Podcast. We could not be more thrilled to have Carrie Bennett back again. Why would we have Carrie back again? Because she's that good. She's a true quantum biology expert who specializes in cellular healing, structured water, and mitochondrial wellness. Living in a cold area of the country, Carrie's learned the power of what cold can bring to health in the fall and winter. She's here to tell us why we need to fall in love with winter for our health. Who knew? We're taking notes. Let's take a squint. Hello, everybody. It is my honor to welcome Carrie Bennett to the Squint Podcast today. She is my mentor. She is amazing. She is a wealth of knowledge, and she is here to change our mind about winter. Who thought that someone could change our mind about winter? But for all you people in cold climates, the future is bright. So, Carrie, let's start there. At Squint, I talk about very actionable daily steps to get your light right. So tell us a little bit about this term lux and how, just getting outside, the difference in brightness of light between being inside and outside is a big deal. Tell us more.
Number one, thanks for having me, Shannon. It's always great to chat with you. And I'm so excited because this topic of winter, I live in a cold winter place, right? Like I live in the west side of Michigan where it's dark, it's snowy, it's gray. And I literally thought I needed a light box to quote unquote cure my seasonal depression. It didn't work, right? The light box didn't work. It kind of made me crazy. So lighting is really, really important, especially in the winter when we're going to be indoors more, right? Like, so I understand summer, it's easy, right? Go outside or open the window, have all that natural light coming in. It's very easy. And so come winter, we have to be more aware and more diligent about our daily practices. And it's not about stressing, but it's just understanding, like you were saying, there's some really key things our brain and our bodies need in the winter that are more challenging with our current modern typical LED environment. And so first one that you talk about is a measurement that's called lux. And lux is just a fancy way of basically saying brightness. How bright is the intensity of the light that you are under? And in modern indoor lighting, it may feel bright to us, but it's actually quite dim. So we're talking like, it's not unusual to have a room be about 100 lux on a gray, cloudy day in the winter, especially if we're not sitting close to a window. And so you talk 100 to 300 lux there indoors, whereas we're designed, if we literally that same day, same time, if I were to step outside on that gray day, my eyes would be receiving 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 lux, depending on the time of day, or up to 10,000 even. And then you add in the brightness of the snow that you could also get as well. And you have a very bright outdoor environment in winter. But I think what our brains say, at least mine used to say, is, "Oh, I'm not going to go outside because it's like I feel blah indoors. It's gray out there. Why would I feel any better if I step outside and it's gray outside still?" And that couldn't be further from the truth. We really have to understand that just the brightness difference from an indoor to an outdoor environment during the day can make a huge difference in terms of our mood, our alertness, just the ability to focus, concentrate, those types of things. And so it's a small thing. And I really encourage people to experiment in winter getting outside more simply because of the brightness alone.
Right. And then our mitochondria work by light and temperature too. So
yes,
by getting out in the cold and actually kind of embracing the cold, we're signaling our body about where we are on Earth and what we need.
Yeah, exactly. So our mitochondria are always trying to anticipate what our exposures are currently and what they may be, right? And so if I never go outside and allow my body to experience the changing temperatures, say in the fall, and then all of a sudden I jump just straight into like turning the heat up in my house to 72 degrees Fahrenheit, I don't actually allow my mitochondria to become really more efficient metabolically. So when we get cold, mitochondria say, "Whoa, okay, there's something going on in here." Number one, This could be a stressor if this cold is applied for too long, right? We could absolutely overdo cold, and we could have a major stressor. So the mitochondria, anytime, even exercise, right? It's a stressor that the mitochondria are responding to, saying, okay, we got to get more efficient. So they're going to increase their efficiency. We can upregulate these processes called autophagy and mitophagy, which kind of clears out the damaged, broken parts in the cells, so everything runs better. But secondarily, we have a really specific type or I'll say a specific tissue in our bodies called brown adipose tissue. And people may hear adipose and they think, oh, isn't that another word for fat tissue? And it is, but this is a different type of fat on our bodies. It's a type of fat that actually lives on our more superficial on our collarbones, tops of the shoulders, back of the neck. And that type of adipose tissue isn't the pinchable subcutaneous adipose tissue. And instead, what it is it's an adipose tissue that's brown because it's packed full of mitochondria. Mitochondria make tissue browner, right? And so these mitochondria are designed then in response to sensing cold. They will take fat from storage. So they will take that white pinchable adipose tissue and they'll take it from storage and they'll send essentially the charge, the electrons that are built into that fat to the mitochondria and the protons as well, and transform that white fat into heat for us. And so that's something that, again, needs to be coached into our bodies. And if we have a cold avoidance strategy, the only way that my body can heat up in the winter is to shiver. So I really want to take advantage of the fact that I can use the transitioning cold temperatures to make my mitochondria more efficient, my cells more efficient in general, but also as my primary heat source of my body so that my mitochondria can heat me up from within and my muscles don't have to shiver to do it.
So, talk briefly about, if you will, brown adipose tissue and cold plunging.
Yeah, and it's not just cold plunging. So here's what's interesting. Let me talk about brown adipose tissue just a little bit more in general,
Okay.
because babies are born with what's called very active brown adipose tissue, meaning in response to cold, they can easily increase their body's own internal heat temperature. And that makes sense because babies don't have muscular contractions that are as well established, so they can't shiver efficiently. They can't get up and turn off the or turn down the thermostat or turn up the thermostat. They can't go put a sweater on from the closet. And so the general assumption was that babies are born with brown adipose tissue, but once we reach adulthood, we lose brown adipose tissue. And they were doing scans. They were looking for scans that you can essentially give the body, for example, added glucose, or you can give the body a specific tag, a marker, and then you could kind of trace where that goes in the body. And so they've got tracers for this brown adipose tissue. And they would test these adult after adult after adult. And they said, nope, not really present in adult bodies, but yep, absolutely present in kid bodies. And then they thought, well, let's expose people to a cold temperature and then see what happens to the brown adipose tissue. And sure enough, that brown adipose tissue starts to light up. And so what this tells us is that us adults who, like myself, I was living in what's called thermoneutral conditions year round. I was literally experiencing 70 and sunny, like I said, year round, whether my air conditioning was, set at that or whether my heat was set at that. And so my brown adipose tissue in the winter never had to activate. But if you actually allow your body to experience cold, and there's various ways that we can introduce cold into the body, that adipose tissue becomes active. And with that active brown adipose tissue, yes, comes the ability of my body to be able to heat in response to cold, which feels really good, right? When we're outside and, going on a walk or something like that in the middle of winter. But it also is really healthy for my metabolism to help to burn fat as a fuel source. It can regulate my blood glucose levels. It has, there's a crosstalk between the brown adipose tissue and my mitochondria. And in fact, they're even looking at how you can have highly functioning brown adipose tissue and improved mental health. So this is a new area of research where we're really just tapping into the fact that our body is designed to experience cold when it's seasonally available to us. And we have a mechanism built in that not only allows us to generate heat, but actually thrive in response to that cold exposure.
Right. And then the flip side of that is that our bodies actually come dysfunctional when we aren't aligned with our natural environment. When we live in the winter and we're eating blueberries from Whole Foods and we're turning the heat up to 78 and we're getting cozy and never getting cold.
Yeah, yeah. Unless you live in a place that experiences perpetual summer, like in the tropics, we have to like embrace the seasonal variations that come in terms of our lighting, the light to dark cycles, the temperature cycles, the food availability. And when we do, it's like sometimes I almost feel silly talking about this stuff because I'm like, this is just
Basic.
kind of basic and obvious,
Right.
but it's just something that we've never really had to work with. We haven't been taught to work within this framework.
Right.
Had I been living 200 years ago, I would have no choice but to work within this framework. And so it's just that modern living, like you said, allows us to get that pineapple in the middle of December and have the lights on all the time. And there's a difference, as I'm certain you've talked about here, there's a huge difference between the lighting that we would have had from campfire versus the lighting we have now from LEDs, which is has that very sharp spike of blue, which tells our brain anytime we're around that lighting from screens or bulbs, our brain says it's the middle of summer in the afternoon, basically. And so it's just a different, we just have to reintroduce the seasonality back into our lifestyles.
Right. And then speaking of something that may not be so basic and obvious is melatonin. And
Mhm.
so, we learn that it's, the sleep hormone and that just magically comes out at night and we're ready for sleep. Well, we all know that's not happening because everyone's struggling with their sleep. Can you talk a little bit about morning sun and the importance of daytime brightness and how that builds melatonin and why melatonin isn't just a sleep hormone, but it's so much
Yeah.
more for autophagy and
So much more, so much more. So there, number one, so let's talk about what happens. Like we're sleeping, right? And that melatonin, it actually starts breaking down. And it ultimately, when we're sleeping, it breaks down into an amino acid called tryptophan. And tryptophan is the one that people may think about after, let's say, Thanksgiving meal, right? Because turkey is high in tryptophan. That's why we feel so groggy after things. It's really probably your blood sugar is the issue, but it's a calming amino acid. And so that's why people, I think, oftentimes we wake up groggy and then they never shake off the grogginess. Because guess what? That groggy tryptophan is designed to be activated via light. And it is this morning ultraviolet light that has enough energy in those wavelengths to essentially be captured by this tryptophan, which is a ring-shaped amino acid. It gets captured by the tryptophan, and that gives the tryptophan the energy it needs to become serotonin. So then all of a sudden we shake off the grogginess, and that serotonin helps us to feel focused, energized, excited about our day. That serotonin also helps with the bowel movement. And so that's again another reason why we're quote unquote designed to have this morning bowel movement. Certainly food will start to initiate the peristaltic waves, but the serotonin also is a gut motility stimulant. And that's all because we are designed to recycle the tryptophan from the night before, get the morning light exposure, build this serotonin pool. And then in response to darkness at night, that serotonin gets converted into melatonin. And then that's where we'll fall asleep. And that melatonin will run. Not only will we fall asleep, that's obviously people assume, okay, melatonin, it puts us to sleep. That's part of the story. Melatonin does help us to have what's called, a circadian onset to sleep, but it runs a bunch of repair programs while we are asleep. So it's a prime antioxidant. It clears up cellular damage. It runs autophagy, like we talked about, to clean up the broken parts. It runs apoptosis. So cells that are beyond repair, they're designed to run this self-clearing program, and that self-clearing program needs adequate melatonin in order to operate. And if we don't have that self-clearing program, these dysfunctional inflamed cells start to divide uncontrollably, and that's essentially cancerous or precancerous cells. And that's just the melatonin that we're talking about right now. That's just pineal melatonin, which is the melatonin that's secreted by that gland in our brain once it senses darkness. The vast majority of the melatonin we're designed to make is during the day, and also in the evening as well, which is called cellular melatonin. But in order to optimize that cellular melatonin production, we need near infrared light, which we would have had literally 24/7 if we were our natural lighting during the day was the sun, even on a cloudy day and even in the shade, right? And our natural indoor lighting was campfire. We would have been bathing in this near infrared energy that can penetrate deeply into the body and stimulate the mitochondria in each of our cells to make melatonin. And this melatonin serves a beautiful purpose because mitochondria, as natural energy producers in the cell, they also naturally produce some metabolic damage. Or if they're exposed to, let's say, something that creates a little mitochondrial dysfunction, a toxin, a non-native EMF, something along those lines, we're going to create a little bit more inflammation in the cell. But then if the mitochondria, as they're sensing that they're making this, this inflammation, they can also make the melatonin to help clean up the damage. It means that our cells, upon going to sleep, they need less deep cleaning, if you will. So I liken it to running a daycare, and like think about what the kids do all day long, right? There's peanut butter and jelly smeared on the wall. There's crumbs here. There's toys there. There's clothes here. And during like what I would hopefully be able to do if I was running this daycare, although I'm even not that good at my house at doing this, but hopefully, hopefully, if I was running the daycare, I would say, okay, let's tidy up all day long so that I can do the deep cleaning once the kids have gotten picked up. And so that's the same thing that this melatonin inside of our cells is designed to do. It's designed to tidy up all day long, keep the aggressive inflammation at bay, so that nighttime we can go in and we can run that autophagy, that apoptosis, that cellular cleaning, and essentially wake up with organs and tissues that are healthier than when we went to sleep.
So if 95% of melatonin is created during the day, this is kind of the cleanup melatonin that we're working
Yes.
on all day. So we can really pack a punch at night to do the hard work of cleaning out cancer cells and doing the hardcore cellular regeneration and recycling.
Exactly. There's some really great research in terms of that cancer aspect of the preeminent melatonin researcher in the world, Russell Reiter. He's shown he wrote an article that's called Part-Time Cancer, and what he showed was that when these cells were exhibiting what's called a cancerous metabolism, which is called a Warburg metabolism, when these cells had adequate melatonin exposure in response to darkness, they flipped out of that dysfunctional metabolism back into a healthy metabolic function. And that's a hallmark of cancer and also autoimmune diseases, so basically cells that are in a highly dysfunctional state. And so he thought, okay, well, melatonin, part-time cancer, but what about the melatonin we can make all day long in response to near infrared light? Like, are we really harming our body's ability to clear out cancerous cells and revert to a healthy metabolism because we are not making melatonin adequately in any capacity? We're not blocking the artificial light at night, right? So that nighttime melatonin is suppressed, and we don't have near infrared exposure anymore. Modern window glass is blocking it, modern bulbs have omitted it. And so we are really, really near infrared deficient and therefore very melatonin deficient as well.
Wow. So basically, because we're spending so much time inside, we're not making that 95% of the melatonin. And then at night, because we're getting our artificial light, we're also blocking that pineal melatonin. So basically, we have roadblocks at every point, and then everyone's wondering why they can't get to sleep. It's a light story.
It's a light story. And this also tied the seasonal aspect of this. I'd love to, if I could talk about, Shannon, ties into the whole concept of low vitamin D in the winter.
Yes.
And so this was something that never made sense to me because in Michigan, UVB goes away for months on end. And that's the wavelength range of light that's designed to strike the skin and start the production of vitamin D, right? And all the metabolites of vitamin D. And I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be natural for my vitamin D levels to go low in the winter if I can't make it through my skin? Like, why would I need to supplement high dose melatonin? I'm sorry, high dose vitamin D. And so I thought it's like just never made any sense to me. And then about 3 years ago, a paper came out, and that paper said, "Is melatonin the next vitamin D?" And what that paper showed was that melatonin and vitamin D, they have an overlap in terms of the repair programs and the jobs that they have in the body, and that melatonin can bind to the vitamin D receptor. It was obviously misnamed, right? Because we only thought vitamin D could bind to the vitamin D receptor, but we now know that melatonin can bind to the vitamin D receptor. Meaning, wouldn't it make sense that in the winter, when we have more darkness, we're using melatonin to run those programs. And then in the summer, when we can actually make vitamin D through the skin, we're using vitamin D to run those programs. And I'm going to guarantee you on every person that they tested to say, oh, by the way, you're low in vitamin D. Number one, they were either not getting, it was either in the summer and they weren't getting adequate sunlight exposure on the skin, or it was in the winter and when vitamin D should be low. And if you would have tested their melatonin levels, they would have been tanked as well because none of the studies controlled for people's artificial light at night exposure or infrared exposure during the day. And so likely we were barking up the wrong tree. And clinically, I have seen this time and time again that once you start to maximize the healing benefits of melatonin in the winter, it's not like you're experiencing like it only helps the body, right? It's not like and these people, quote unquote, they test their vitamin D and yes, it's low, right? My vitamin D is only 24 or 20, but they don't get any, there's no associated illnesses with it. There's no worsening of autoimmune conditions. There's because they're maximizing the melatonin pathway, not worrying about artificially elevating via supplementation the vitamin D pathway.
Which is why melatonin is so important, this natural outside daylight during the winter, because it's basically your best defense when you can't get this vitamin D. It's nature's way to kind of balance the seasons because your body wants you to be your best. I mean, sometimes I think we get, oh, this is against me, this is happening, but your body is designed to be outside. And if we can just get outside more, amazing things can happen.
Agreed. It literally is my whole journey with this aspect of it. I'd been diving into the light story for a little while, in terms of using the light to help heal my body from my chronic fatigue and my digestive issues.
Mhm.
And but I was still kind of ignoring winter, right? I was like, oh well, come springtime again, I'll do the light stuff better. It's too hard in the winter. And out of necessity, like so I had a light box on my desk at my office. And, I thought, okay, like I have low libido, low energy, low motivation come this time of year. This is supposed to help me, right? This is supposed to cure my seasonal depression. And that bright light just like it was so abrasive. And I think my brain had already adapted because I had been doing some light exposures during the spring and summer and fall. So my brain had adapted to what healthy lighting is like. And it knew that it was this beautiful gradual change of light from sunrise and up. And so essentially going to my office and shining this really aggressive light box into my eyes that did not contain any of the balanced wavelengths that you get from natural light. It was a very visceral reaction that I had to it, like that. This is not good. And so I thought, and at the same time, I had just moved into a new building. So this was February. I just moved into a new building that was about a 10-minute walk to the coffee shop that was normally like right downstairs in my building. And so I literally would say, okay, I'm going to still go to the coffee shop. So I would walk 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back. And this was right around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. And sure enough,
Mhm.
that 20-minute walk, my seasonal depression went away. My energy skyrocketed. I would come back and I would have so much focus and motivation.
Mhm.
And that was the only recognition I needed to be like, oh my gosh, how silly. You did it all summer, spring. Like, of course the winter's who cares if it's gray and cold? Of course you're going to get it in the winter as well. And that led me on this journey to like, what else am I doing that's not true winter? And how can I start to engage with the cold differently? How can I start to engage with, I call it strategic scarcity. I was intermittent fasting wrong, like for a huge portion of my 30s. I was intermittent fasting wrong, and so I would, it's like, let me just skip meals, skip meals, skip meals, skip meals, skip meals. And it like, wait, that really forced my body to ride on this stress wave. And so anyways, all of this experience is just me being like, oh my gosh, I want to teach this to the world because now winter feels great to me. I start to crave that transition in the temperature. In fact, it's been in the 80s as of late, and I'm ready. It's like, give me the cold weather. My body's starting to ask for it because it's recognizing that the days are getting shorter. And I just want other people to experience this too. And it's because it is such a joy to live in a winter climate and not dread it.
It's true. And maybe you can clarify for some of our listeners because I think, people are getting more up to speed on light and the value of sun, but I think that everyone's kind of just like vitamin D is trendy. They want to talk about vitamin D, and they don't even understand that it's actually UVB. And there's different types of UV light. Can you talk about UVA and how
Sure.
it may still be present even in the winter in certain periods of the day, and why that's so important to get the UV that doesn't make vitamin D, but it does so many other things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really helpful for people to know about light that comes to your location, where you are, based on how high the sun gets in the sky. And so before the sun reaches what's called 10 degrees above the horizon, right? So you can kind of picture like these angles that the sun gets. If the sun is below 10 degrees above the horizon, there is no ultraviolet light in your area. And there are some people, I used to say, well, everyone has UV, everyone has ultraviolet light in the winter, even if it's just UVA. And then people above the Arctic Circle were messaging me. I was like, okay, my bad. You're absolutely right. That sun
Right.
for a stretch of time does not get above 10 degrees above the horizon. And so once the sun reaches 10 degrees above the horizon, ultraviolet A appears. And then that ultraviolet A is the only UV light until the sun reaches 30 degrees above the horizon. That's when UVB appears. But there's a whole stretch of the country that's, I believe, about above the 33rd or 35th latitude, right? That does not get that UVB intensity during the winter. We literally, at least I can speak for Michigan for sure, is that it disappears for me at the end of October, comes back at the end of January, but does not reach the intensity I need in order to make UVB or make vitamin D in my skin until about mid-April or so. So there's this huge stretch, right, where
Right.
there's no UVB, but there is UVA. And so that UVA, typically that 10 degrees above the horizon is approximately an hour after sunrise. And then it'll be there all day long with all the other colors coming from the sun. And then the sun has to drop below 10 degrees for it to disappear. And we have found, and we meaning like there's been a handful of us clinicians who have really been experimenting with like which chunks of the day are most impactful. And a couple of my colleagues and I have really found a huge benefit to going outside during that first appearance of UVA. So within about an hour or two after that UVA appears in the morning. And it turns out that that appearance of UVA in the morning, it initiates a bunch of signaling pathways. Number one, we already talked about how it takes tryptophan and makes serotonin, but it also takes other amino acids like phenylalanine and tyrosine and turns them into dopamine, norepinephrine, right? So it really enhances that neurochemistry. It also then it starts to affect the thyroid hormone. So it works through a thyroid pathway. So it makes sense, right? The sun is rising, the day is starting. My brain says, okay, thyroid, now is your turn to have more activation, become more active in terms of the conversion because you're going to be doing stuff. You got to survive. You got to hunt, find, gather food. You got to procreate. You got to do all these things. So we're going to have a more active metabolism. And that light signaling really helps to the extent that I've had people, and this is not medical advice, they worked with their clinicians and their physicians on this, but I've had clients who were on medication for hypothyroidism and they had to reduce it drastically after consistently getting UVA light. And we call it UVA rise as that UV is appearing. I've also had clients with literally without a thyroid who do have to be on thyroid medication for the rest of their lives. They also had to reduce it simply because of that consistent UVA light. So there's a lot of benefit that we get from that UV light. And that's just a couple of pathways. We could talk about an entirely different pathway called POMC. And that's going to affect things like pain. So getting correct UV light signaling can be analgesic. So it can be lower pain. It can lower inflammation. It can improve fat burning through enhancing a process called lipolysis. It can help to produce a chemical called beta endorphin, which is our runner's high, to make us want to go outside and get that natural light signaling. And so this UV light, just because it doesn't have UVB, doesn't mean that it's worthless. It is absolutely rich in benefits, especially in this morning chunk of time.
Wow. It is incredible what happens during that chunk of time. I mean, if you said, you can only be outside even though you need full spectrum sun. I mean, that morning light, and I keep drilling that in over and over again, that UV rise, it's so important. And especially, I mean, so, many women that I talk to that have thyroid issues
Yep.
and they're not getting morning sun and they're not converting that T4 to T3. And then they're wondering why they have to go back and get more Synthroid.
Yep. And can we say something here? This pathway we're talking about, whereas UVB needs to touch the skin to make vitamin D, the pathway that we're mostly talking about is through the eyes.
Yeah.
So don't put those sunglasses on because sunglasses will signal, no, no, there's no UV, there's no UV. So the number of people on I don't say anything, Shannon, like part of me wants to be like, you'd probably do an experiment. I see you walking the same path every morning with me with those do an experiment next week, do it without sunglasses on and then report back to me. I mean, like, I don't, because I would have to stop probably a dozen people on my walk as I'm
It's
going. But
so
like, I
true.
want to know, like, if they would notice that big difference without those shades on, those blinders on, essentially.
It's crazy. And there, I mean, it's, you know, I have the same experience when I go on walks. I see these women and their bodies are totally covered and they have a trucker hat and sunglasses and earbuds. And I think, oh,
I know, I know. I just say a little prayer. I just say
I
a
do.
little blessing. It's like,
What do
I
you,
hope that you get what you need from this walk, in spite of the fact that there's
exactly.
maybe other things that you could be
It's true.
doing.
It's true. So let's talk a little bit because you're so great on this subject, but I want to go to another wavelength, which is infrared, and just talk about so infrared is 53%. Of light, it's available all day. It's just there. Just get outside, get it.
Yes.
Tell me how it impacts the water in our body. And I know we're over 93% water. And what I'm trying to teach people is that it's food is important. Nourishing food is really important, but we get energy from so many different places.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
water in our body, and obviously melanin, the semiconductors, but water is such a big part of our energy. And the only thing people are thinking about water is their Stanley Cup. And so I'm saying, no, it's so much more. The water in your body is a completely different water. It's this crystalline structure that's, waiting, begging for you to get outside. Can you explain infrared light and water?
Yeah, sure. And so this is really what I basically did as a clinician is I took the research from a lovely human being named Dr. Gerald Pollack, who he just had a stroke. So I want to make sure if anyone's hearing this, please, this is public knowledge. So say your prayers, say your prayers. He amazing. Like his work literally transformed my clinical practice for the exact reason you're talking about. I was food myopic, right? And it's like, it's only the food. It's only the food. And certainly I don't want you eating McDonald's, right? I want you eating as clean as you can. But once I really understood the true energy currency of the cell was this special type of water that Dr. Pollack calls EZ or exclusion zone water. And like you said, it is literally not like a liquid. That was my assumption in undergrad when I was looking at these cross sections of cells and seeing this blue inside of the cell. My assumption was that it just behaved just like a typical liquid. So if you're watching this on video, right, I assumed it would be just like a liquid in a glass. And instead, that water that inside of the cells, as long as it is in contact with a biological surface, which they're everywhere, right? Think about all the cell membranes and mitochondria,
Collagen,
proteins,
everything. Yeah.
collagen, everything, right? We're packed with these biological hydrophilic surfaces. The water reorganizes how it essentially bonds with other water molecules. And instead of having a more of a flowy type feel to it, like it would in a glass, it's a little bit more rigid in terms of how it structures itself, which is a lot more synonymous with ice, but not that solid, right? But it still has a more ordered arrangement to it, which gives it more of a honey or gel-like texture or consistency. And turns out when water structures itself like that, it gives the water a negative charge. And like we can talk about the health and vitality of the cell in terms of things like membrane potential or voltage. But what we need to realize is that that is dependent on the water. And we had never, the general assumption when all of these topics were being explored, from the membrane potential to the cellular voltage, they never thought the water was playing a part in any capacity. They assumed that we had these channels on the outsides of the cell that were pumping potassium and sodium out to maintain this differential because sodium has this charge, potassium has this charge, blah, blah, blah. And Jerry was like, well, what if it's the water? What if it's truly the water that could be responsible for maintaining this healthy vitality, this vital energy inside of the cell, and therefore the health of the cell, the health of the organ, the health of the human? And as a clinician, that just struck me so powerfully. And I said to myself, what are all the ways that we can support this water to stay in this gelled exclusion zone or EZ phase? And the top way is through infrared exposure. And it's not just all infrared has an effect, but there's a specific infrared range that we do feel on the cusp of what we would start to feel as heat. That wavelength range is what will penetrate our cells and will cause that water, if it's starting to drain its charge, and by draining, it just becomes more bulk, unstructured, right? What causes it to regain this structure and therefore this negative healthy charge is that infrared exposure. And so think about what's happening. If we were outside, like you said, we always have infrared. And in the winter, we would have been heating our living environments with a really, really infrared rich energy source, which would have been campfire, which is just full of that infrared that would create this structured water, replenish the structured water inside of us.
And just so
Now it,
the
oh,
battery is created, that energy is created for us because the light splits water, and water is H2O. So you're splitting positive and negative charge.
yeah,
So it
there's
kind
an
of creates a battery, if you will.
It does. It does. So I don't want to misspeak because, talk with a lot of different water scientists, everyone agrees that exclusion zone water exists. Everyone agrees that the water structures itself in a way that creates this more gel-like state, and this structure that's closest to these biological surfaces is negatively charged. And what happens is, in order for that water to have a negative charge, they had to have kicked out a positive charge. So likely you have the OH portion of water, which is negatively charged, organizing itself in this zone that's called the EZ or exclusion zone. And likely you have an H plus or a positive charge that's kicked out here. And that's where essentially you have what's called a positive, they call it the proton zone or a positively charged zone. And Jerry's lab is the lab that showed that you put a little tiny micro electrode in each negatively charged and positively charged ones and connect it via a wire to a light bulb, and it lights a light bulb. So it is legitimate energy, a legitimate potential energy. A lot of what happens with this energy has to do with protein dynamics. And the way that cells work is through protein folding and unfolding. And again, the assumption was that ATP is what does that. And now we realize that it's the water and its ability to go from a gelled phase to a less gelled phase that is what creates the protein folding and unfolding, and essentially is the working gears of the cell. And
Which,
so that's
for neurodegenerative diseases, that's the foundation, because this
huge.
folding and unfolding is happening because of your lack of voltage in your body, which is
Yeah,
all comes back to light and water and all the things we know about connecting to nature.
exactly. Well, and then you get the double whammy of not making melatonin, so not activating autophagy, and then you get these damaged proteins that just build up, and the tissues become more and more dysfunctional. It's really a light story. It is.
So
And
at
so,
night, when you're not making the melatonin, when you're not experiencing this cell autophagy, that's when the misfolding is happening. You're basically kind of
well,
coming up. Go
you
ahead.
get misfolded proteins that just kind of aggregate together, right? And so the assumption was that the misfolded proteins were the cause of the Alzheimer's. And what they're realizing now is that they're just a downstream ramification of the fact that we don't have the ability to clear them via the autophagy. We're not actually having the proteins in the correct shape to begin with because of, well, very little research. My hypothesis is that we're lacking the correct ability to create the protein in its elongated shape to begin with. That struck we'll just this you can cut this out if you need to, Shannon, but like this is I'm sure you'll love to nerd out on this with me. But what ATP does, ATP is important. ATP binds to specific sites along the protein to allow, once ATP binds, water can bind to that site. And once water binds to that site, that's a biological surface. That structured gelled water will hold the protein in its elongated fashion. And elongated protein can pass electrons easier. It can pass charges easier. That's again the name of the game. It's like you almost have to picture like what's going on inside of us. I picture it as like this fiber optic almost light show, right? Where energy is being moved super fast, and it has to have the correct orientation in order to do so. And if you can't get that correct orientation, then you're going to have a dysfunctional cell. And in the nervous system, that could easily lead to neurodegeneration. So yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's fascinating that everything we thought we knew, we maybe don't know, and we're learning more and more every day, which is
Yeah, I'm grateful for these water researchers because they had an uphill battle of being made fun of because we thought we knew everything there was to know about water. And I feel like they're finally being rewarded, whether they're still in this earthly plane or not. They're finally being rewarded because
right.
of the fact that we actually now know that water is such an integral factor in all of the operations of the cell. It's not just inert, it's not just a byproduct, it is an essential aspect of our health and physiology.
And in your research, are you seeing that exposure to non-native electromagnetic fields does have an influence on water creation?
I want to, so I,
Hold on one second. I have a trash man. I'm just going to.
oh, go ahead. Tell your trash man. Okay. Tell your trash man he's interrupting our interview.
I mean, we're talking about exclusion zone water. This is important stuff.
And so in terms of like what you're asking, what I was finding with the research? Do you remember what you asked?
Yes, research with so non-native electromagnetic fields like,
Mm,
Wi-Fi,
yeah.
and then that effect on the cell and the ionic gated channels, I know
Mm,
it's the calcium influx moment that happens with these non-native
yeah.
electromagnetic fields.
That's part of it. It's part of it. Yeah. So number one, Jerry had a preliminary study that he did, and I and other people have clarified that with him that what that study originally was alluding to was when an exclusion zone, let's say a biological surface with a structured water, when that exclusion zone was exposed to Wi-Fi radiation, it prevented the exclusion zone from forming its full extent. It
Okay.
could likely a 15 to 20% reduction. However, that was unpublished research. So and the research, apparently the research assistant left the lab, and so they were never able to actually, he never actually repeated that experiment. But that was an initial thing that made me think, so maybe our exposure to like you said, the AirPods, the Apple Watch, the wireless, everything, the smart homes up, all that could be impairing our body's ability to have maxed out exclusion zone water. So that certainly I think could be at play. We just need additional verification on that. The
But
other thing though
most
that
importantly is daylight, just getting daylight sun,
getting
getting
daylight,
brightness. Yeah.
go outside and get that natural light exposure, or you have to be intentional about your infrared exposures during the winter even. So that's why every once in a while I love a fire in the fireplace. It's why I think sauna use is so prevalent in the far northern European countries and has such a history of use, and has long-term studies showing massive benefits for people who do that, because I think it was a way to supplement from lack of light or lack of campfire use even in the middle of winter.
You're
So
heating up your body, so you're creating this kind of infrared heat. Explain
you're
that. Yeah.
exposing yourself to an
Yeah.
additional source of infrared, and that source of concentrated infrared is will penetrate the body, and if there's a decrease in the structured water, that exclusion zone water, it'll increase it and kind of max that out. And so I think is a very important aspect of what's lacking, because we don't have the campfire exposure to that. And modern indoor, here's the double, here's like the quadruple whammy these days of a modern indoor home in the winter. Number one, we're under artificial blue light. That has been shown to impair mitochondrial function. So the mitochondria aren't going to be as good at making the water. Next, you have the fact that we don't have any sources of infrared that are the really rich campfire style infrared that's potentially draining exclusion zone water. We're going to be closer to non-native EMFs, right? So we might be working on our technology more, or just being in the smart home itself is going to have a closer proximity to that. That is going to also affect mitochondria and their ability to make water for us, as we were talking about, because these voltage gated channels stay open and it changes the structure of the cell, changes the mitochondria, or structure of the water in the cell, changes the mitochondria. And then I had one more, which was, just the drier air in the winter. It's one that we maybe think of in terms of its dehydrating effect, but it truly is. I mean, layer that on with, and thirst down regulates in the winter. Do you know, and my hypothesis as to why thirst decreases in the winter, even though our likelihood of dehydration is higher, is because of the fact that we were designed like hibernating animals. We were designed to be able to pull body fat from storage, and that body fat from storage can become 4 times more metabolic water than, say, if the mitochondria were burning glucose, which we would have had low availability of glucose in the winter. But again, we're not metabolically flexible to be able to burn fat, and we're not necessarily making a seasonal switch to our eating. And so therefore, all of this combines for us to be just chronically dehydrated, and therefore that water battery is drained. Then with this chronic dehydration, you also get an increase of histamine. People think of histamine in response to something like being exposed to an allergens, but in the body, histamine acts as what's called a drought management system. And so if our blood volume starts to get dehydrated, certain capillaries around non-essential organs, they won't leak as much fluid out of them, and therefore not as much nutrients and things out into those areas. Whereas the essential organs, let's say the brain and the heart, they're going to drive the flow and allow the flow to happen there. But histamine is used at that level. And that increased histamine burden in the body, then all of a sudden we're exposed to an environmental trigger with it. Maybe we're indoors more, so we're going to be maybe around more in environmental triggers in the winter. If we have these like allergies, like dust mites, things like that, you get histamine based symptoms. I've seen lifelong histamine-based symptoms get eliminated when you actually hydrate someone appropriately.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about how to hydrate appropriately.
It's a
Just
multifold
basic, like
strategy.
three things to think about
Yeah.
each day about your water.
Three things. Number one, you have to drink adequate amounts of good quality water, which is as close to natural spring water as you can get. That natural spring water, you want it to be free of impurities and toxins, but you also want it to have the natural minerals and structure that you would get. And so just do the best you can with that. Get the best quality water that you can. And I want people to consume an adequate amount. And so, and for most people, just due to our naturally dehydrating environments, that's at least 1.5 liters of that water every single day. I like my clients to front load it in the morning and to have minerals with it in the morning because even breathing, especially in a drier environment, we can lose more moisture via the breath. And so you want to make sure you're hydrated in the morning. Then I want you to get something that supports your mitochondria. Do something that supports your mitochondria and do something that supports your exclusion zone water. So I want your mitochondria to make water. I want you to help charge that battery. And that's light, right? Like if you have a temperature climate where you can go out and get that light on your skin, by all means, please do so as much as possible. And simply going outside, you're signaling to the mitochondria the correct time of day, which also helps them be better at their function, which one of those functions, as we know, is making that water. But this is also where things like red light therapy can be very beneficial because it helps mitochondria specifically make water. It's where the infrared exposure can be very beneficial as well. So having key sources of key sources of infrared could be something as simple, believe it or not, as a therapeutic bath, because that's a very concentrated source of infrared that you could soak into the body and allow it to expand that exclusion zone. So just this awareness about needing to do a more comprehensive hydration strategy.
Okay, and then lights at night.
Mm-hmm.
In California, we can't purchase infrared light bulbs. So what do you suggest? I mean, I obviously have some companies that I like and I know, but just in terms of thinking about your evenings, obviously, reducing LED lights.
Still can't get incandescents.
No.
Bummer. So reduce I would say reduce the amount of lights you use in general. And if you could have strategic table lamps within your framework of safety, right? I want you to feel like you're safe, but within your framework of safety, table lamps that are LEDs that do not have blue light in them can be very beneficial. Salt lamps, Himalayan salt lamps, some people love them, right? They can be very beneficial in terms of their ability to provide a warm, gentle lighting environment without the blue. Basically, you want to minimize anything that's emitting a blue wavelength of light because that is what will start to suppress the pineal melatonin production, which includes then wearing orange tone blue blockers if we're on screens, if we can't turn our screens red, that type of a thing as well. So combination of blue blockers and the low blue light bulbs from companies like Bone Charge are great options.
Excellent. Excellent. And every year you do a winter challenge. Tell us a little bit about that. And then
Yeah, so
close with that.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're approaching the Prep for Winter Challenge for this year, which is basically just taking all of my Michigan winter experience and teaching people how they can transform from having a miserable winter with seasonal depression and just being cold all the time to actually thriving and enjoying winter and understanding that winter has its own seasonal gifts, from the darkness to the cold and other things that we can take advantage of when it comes to having a truly thriving and healthy winter. So just a series of emails that people get that really gives them short, impactful videos that kind of reframes winter for them and then gives them the practical guidelines as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm hoping to get you back on the calendar for spring so we can just cycle Carrie through and then we can start talking about how we prepare for spring. But for now, you're letting us fall in love with winter again. And it's on a very serious note, winter is, seasonal affective disorder is real. And mental health is definitely an issue during the winter. And so it's so important to get out and get that light. Do you have one last comment about mental health and light?
Yeah, I mean, the name of the game is experience darkness when it's in your environment. So allow that darkness signaling to truly be beneficial. That's healing for the brain at nighttime, and then get that morning light during the day. That alone, those two shifts, blocking the artificial, minimizing that at night, and getting that morning light whenever you can even 3 minutes, 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be this 3 hour hike in the woods for it to matter. And so that consistent little stimulus of morning light, block the artificial, it goes a long way towards supporting people who have issues with mental health challenges.
Perfect. Thank you so much.